He was not supposed to fall first. In the middle of the Arizona desert, where the road shimmered like a sheet of burning glass and the sky held no mercy, the white K9 dropped to his knees before Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks could even say his name. Ghost had been moving ahead of him only seconds earlier, lean and silent, his pale coat flashing against the red dust like a scrap of cloud lost on the wrong side of heaven. Then his legs folded. His chest hit the sand. His breath came out short, dry, and broken. Isaiah froze for one heartbeat, maybe two, because men like him did not freeze easily. He had served too long, crossed too many quiet places where silence meant danger, and carried too many names in the back of his mind to mistake fear for anything else. But this was different. This was Ghost, the dog who never stumbled. The dog who could hear a truck 3 miles off before the engine reached human ears. The dog who had once found a missing boy in a canyon after every search team had already turned back. Now Ghost lay beneath the noon sun with his tongue darkened by heat, his white fur dusted orange, his amber eyes half open and fixed on something Isaiah could not see. The desert smelled of hot stone, dry brush, and the faint rubber scent rising from the tires of Isaiah's parked Jeep a few hundred yards behind them. Heat bent the horizon. It pressed against his face, slipped under his collar, crawled into his lungs until every breath felt borrowed. There was no wind, no shade except the thin broken line beneath a cluster of black rocks ahead. No sound but the insect buzz hidden in the brush and the weak scrape of Ghost's paw against the ground. Isaiah dropped beside him so fast his knees sank into the sand. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though his own voice had gone rough. "I've got you." Ghost did not look at him. That was the first thing that scared Isaiah. Ghost always looked at him. In the field, in the barracks, in the long empty hours after midnight when Isaiah woke from dreams he never spoke about, that dog's eyes always found him, steady as a porch light. But now Ghost's gaze stayed locked past Isaiah's shoulder, toward the jagged rocks, half buried in waves of heat. His paw dragged again, one slow line in the sand, then another. Not random, not panic. A mark, a direction. Isaiah followed the line with his eyes and felt something tighten beneath his ribs. "What are you showing me?" he breathed. Ghost tried to lift his head, failed, and released a sound so small it barely counted as a whine. Isaiah reached for the canteen clipped to his belt. It was light, too light. He shook it once and heard the last few mouthfuls slide inside. He knew the rules. In desert heat, water was time. Water was judgment. Water was the thin line between walking out and becoming another shape the sun erased. He also knew what the Marine Corps had carved into him long before grief had finished the job. You do not leave your own. Not in a valley. Not on a roadside. Not under a white, pitiless sky. He unscrewed the cap and poured a careful stream into his palm, touching it to Ghost's muzzle. Most of it spilled into the dust. Ghost swallowed once, weakly. Isaiah wet his fingers again and rubbed them along the dog's gums, then poured the last of it onto his neck, working it through the thick fur where the heat had gathered. The water vanished almost instantly, stolen by the air. "Come on," Isaiah said lower now. "Don't make me lose another one." The words came out before he could stop them. They belonged to another place, another day, another voice crackling through a dead radio while sand and smoke swallowed everything whole. Isaiah shut that memory down and slid one hand beneath Ghost's chest. The dog was heavier than he looked, all muscle and bone and loyalty, trembling against Isaiah's arms. For a second, Ghost's head rolled toward him, and their eyes met. There was pain there, yes. Exhaustion, but not surrender. Never surrender. Then Ghost turned his gaze back to the rocks. The message was silent, stubborn, unmistakable. "Not me. Over there." Isaiah looked toward the broken ridge again. The air above it shimmered so hard the stones seemed to breathe. Nothing moved. Nothing called out. Any sensible man would have carried the dog back to the Jeep, started the engine, and driven for help while there was still a chance. But Ghost had never been wrong. Not once. Isaiah tightened his grip, rose with a grunt, and began walking toward the rocks, each step sinking deep into the red sand, each breath scraping at his throat. The dog's body hung limp in his arms, but one paw remained stretched forward, pointing into the heat like a compass made of flesh and faith. Halfway there, Isaiah heard it. At first, he thought it was the cry of a hawk far above the ridge. Then it came again, smaller, thinner, human. Isaiah stopped dead, his shadow falling across Ghost's white fur. The desert, which had seemed empty a moment before, suddenly felt alive with something hidden and waiting. Ghost's ear twitched. Isaiah stared at the rocks, his heart beating hard enough to hurt. Somewhere beyond that ridge, someone was still breathing. The hours before the sun had reached its zenith were deceptive in the desert. Isaiah Brooks and Ghost had left the worn road behind, following the subtle contours of the sand and the scattered shale that protruded like broken teeth. Each step Isaiah took was measured, his boots sinking slightly into the soft red dust, the heat radiating from the ground into his calves and thighs. Ghost, draped limp in his arms only minutes ago, now attempted to lift his head, eyes searching, ears twitching at every whisper of movement. Isaiah could feel the fine grit of sand clinging to the dog's damp fur, the scent of heat and dust filling the air with a heavy weight that pressed against his chest. His mind flickered back to last night, the brief hours of rest under a faded canvas tent, the lingering smell of coffee and leather, the sense of the desert as a waiting place where every hour stretched long and empty. Now, the same desert felt alive, breathing beneath the sun and guiding them, invisible hands moving the landscape into purpose. Isaiah kept one hand on Ghost's chest, the other brushing against his belt where the canteen still held a few sips of water, knowing that every ounce was precious and that every decision here meant a choice between chance and consequence. The ridge they approached was not steep, but the loose gravel made it treacherous, each small stone a potential slip that could undo the careful rhythm Isaiah maintained. Ghost's paw twitched against his forearm, a silent signal, and Isaiah followed the pull of instinct and training, trusting the dog as he had in so many past missions where danger had worn the uniform and body like sandpaper. The light shimmered off the rocks ahead, throwing heat and shadow in unpredictable patterns, and Isaiah squinted through the glare, trying to make out shapes that might indicate life or empty space. He remembered the protocols, the drills drilled into him by older sergeants, the countless times that every minute had meant a life or death outcome. Yet he also remembered the unspoken truth taught by the eyes of a K9. Sometimes seeing is not enough. Sometimes it is the quiet insistence of attention that matters most. Ghost gave a weak whine, not of complaint but of insistence, and Isaiah adjusted his hold, careful not to hurt the dog's fragile frame while ensuring he could still react to anything ahead. The air had taken on a subtle shimmer, waves of heat rolling off the sand and stones, carrying the faint but unmistakable scent of human presence, sweat, dry skin, and the faint tang of metal, the remnants of vehicles and tools left behind in haste. Isaiah recognized the smell, his training kicking in, and tightened his grip on the dog while squinting along the line of rocks. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a sea of ochre and rust, but within this expanse there was purpose, and Ghost was pointing them toward it. Isaiah's own body protested the sun, the heat beating against his skin, the moisture evaporating almost as fast as it appeared, but he moved steadily, each step echoing the cadence of prior patrols, the silent drum of preparation and endurance. He could feel Ghost breathing against his chest, a shallow rhythm, yet in it was a heartbeat of insistence, a reminder that life persisted even at its most fragile. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of rattling debris, the soft scrape of sand over stone, the subtle whistle through narrow crevices. Isaiah paused for a fraction of a second, listening, observing, committing each detail to memory, aware that the desert gave no second chances. The dog's gaze never wavered, locked on a point just beyond the line of the ridge where shadows pooled and heat bent the horizon. Isaiah adjusted his steps, shifting his weight to accommodate the uneven ground, and noticed a slight glimmer, almost hidden beneath the jagged outcrop. His pulse quickened, a subtle awareness of proximity, a silent warning from the senses he had honed over decades. He took a deep breath, inhaling the dry air that carried the scent of the earth, the faint aroma of distant vegetation, and a hint of something else, something unmistakably human. Ghost shifted slightly, nudging Isaiah's hand, as if to confirm what he could not yet see. Isaiah knelt for a moment, setting the dog gently on the ground, the white fur almost glowing against the red sand. The dog rose, shaky but determined, and stepped forward, tail low, ears alert. Isaiah followed cautiously, every step measured, every glance sweeping the terrain, as the first small signs of movement became apparent. A folded piece of cloth, a glint of metal, a shadow that did not belong to stone or sand. Isaiah's training merged with instinct, patience meshed with urgency, and he understood immediately. Ghost had led him to someone, or something, that required attention, that needed them both. The desert no longer felt infinite. It felt defined, a corridor leading to a moment where preparation, loyalty, and the small miracles of persistence would intersect. Isaiah Brooks crouched behind a large outcrop of shale, letting the heat wash over him. The sun high above scorching the sand like an unyielding furnace, while Ghost stood a few feet ahead, tail low but body rigid with attention, eyes scanning every shadow, every subtle movement across the jagged terrain. The dog's ears twitched at the faintest whispers of sound carried by the dry wind, a language Isaiah had learned to interpret over years of training. Each flick of muscle and tilt of head a sentence in a conversation he understood instinctively. Isaiah's boots crunched softly over the loose stones as he followed, sweat rolling down his back and soaking the collar of his olive-drab shirt. But he did not falter. He had been through more extreme conditions, deserts where sandstorms turned the day into night, and mountain passes where the air burned every breath. And yet this moment felt sharper, more immediate, because it involved Ghost, his partner, his sentinel, the creature who had never let him down. Ahead, the ridge cast a long, thin shadow over a shallow depression where the sand had shifted oddly, as if someone had disturbed it in haste. Isaiah's gaze narrowed. The desert could play tricks, but training and instinct combined allowed him to discern patterns where another might see only chaos. Ghost lowered his head and nudged forward with a hesitant paw, then stopped abruptly, ears pricked, body tensed, and Isaiah understood without a word. They had reached the focal point. He set the dog down gently, hands brushing along the warm fur, feeling the tremor beneath his fingers, the rapid pulse that matched the dog's shallow breathing, and whispered, "I am right here, boy. We will get through this together." Ghost lifted his head, eyes glinting amber, and took a careful step into the depression, sniffing along the ground. Each exhale a plume of heat that merged with the shimmer of the desert air. Isaiah followed, scanning the slope of stones, the sparse brush, noting the subtle shift in shadows, the faint outline of a small figure pressed against the sun-baked rocks. As he approached, the scent of human presence became stronger, mingling with the earthy dryness of the sand and the faint metallic tang of a forgotten water bottle nearby. Ghost hesitated, then crouched slightly, a signal of caution, and Isaiah crouched in response, keeping low, aware that every sound, every movement, could signal another living being in need. The small figure came into view, a child perhaps, seated with knees drawn to the chest, hair clinging damp and dusty to the forehead, eyes wide with alarm and the beginnings of relief as Isaiah's shadow fell over the sand. Ghost moved closer, body low, sniffing and nudging with careful precision, as if confirming that the discovery was as Isaiah suspected. Isaiah extended a hand slowly, offering calm reassurance, voice steady despite the pounding of his own heart. "It is okay. You are safe now. We are here to help." The child's lips parted, hesitant, a shallow exhale escaping as the tension of fear began to yield to the recognition of help, and Ghost rested a protective weight across the child's legs, muzzle lowered but eyes alert, scanning the ridge and surrounding rocks for any sign of threat or discomfort. Isaiah glanced around, noting the brilliant glare of the sun, the way the heat rose in waves that distorted distance, and he understood the necessity of measured patience. Hasty movement could cause injury, could frighten, could undo the fragile trust they had established in mere seconds. With one hand on Ghost's collar and the other gently supporting the child, he began to maneuver them toward the slight shadow offered by a larger boulder, careful not to drag, careful to respect the small figure's fear and fragility, whispering reassurance as he moved, all while Ghost maintained position, nose occasionally brushing against Isaiah's arm, as if to communicate readiness and vigilance. The air shimmered and rolled above the ground, carrying the faint whisper of distant rocks shifting, and Isaiah realized that every step was a test of endurance, awareness, and trust, not just his own but that of Ghost and the child now partially in his care. The desert was an unkind teacher, yet in this exact, precise moment, it had offered a lesson in quiet miracles. The ability to move forward, to save, to connect, and to act with deliberate care despite heat, distance, and uncertainty. Ghost pressed closer to the child, nuzzling the shoulder gently, eyes scanning with an almost human alertness, while Isaiah adjusted his grip and continued forward, every motion synchronized, every glance measured, knowing that one misstep could disrupt the fragile thread of safety they were weaving through the harsh expanse. And through it all, the sun continued its climb, relentless and unforgiving. Yet Isaiah and Ghost advanced with steady purpose, an unspoken dialogue of trust, patience, and vigilance carrying them toward what Isaiah now realized could be the first of many lives saved that day. Each step a careful negotiation between heat, sand, and the quiet persistence of survival. Isaiah Brooks carefully guided Ghost and the child along the uneven desert slope, every step deliberate as the sun continued its relentless climb, painting the rocks and sand in harsh tones of orange and red, and yet within that harsh light, there was a clarity that Isaiah relied on. He noticed how Ghost moved, each paw placement considered, ears swiveling at the faintest whispers carried on the wind, and Isaiah realized that the dog was not just alert, but communicating a silent map of safety through instinct and experience. The child clung lightly to Isaiah's arm, eyes wide and glimmering with the first hints of trust, small fingers brushing the coarse fabric of his shirt, and Isaiah murmured softly, "Almost there. We will be safe soon." The words a balm in the unyielding heat. Each breath he drew was heavy, filled with the dry aroma of sun-baked soil, the faint metallic tang of distant rocks, and the lingering scent of the dog pressed close to him, damp fur against his own skin, a reminder of endurance and loyalty. The ridge before them rose gradually, rocks jutting like ancient guardians of the desert, and Isaiah calculated each movement, mindful of loose gravel and the deceptive angles of shadow and light that could betray distance and depth. Ghost paused briefly, glancing back at Isaiah, amber eyes steady, and Isaiah understood the signal. Slow, careful, deliberate. Every muscle of the dog seemed to tense, then relax, guiding them through an invisible path across the heat-shimmered sand. Isaiah adjusted the child's hold, supporting weight and balance, feeling the delicate pulse of life against his hand, aware that panic could undo the fragile cooperation that had formed in the past minutes. A subtle wind stirred, shifting fine grains of sand into brief eddies around their boots, and the sun reflected off a pale piece of stone ahead, a natural marker Isaiah had noticed in the dog's earlier signals. They moved toward it, step by step, the child's breathing uneven but steadying, the dog maintaining an unwavering vigilance, and Isaiah allowed himself a brief glance back, noting the vast expanse of desert, stretching endlessly, waves of heat distorting the horizon, yet all irrelevant to the focused path they had carved together. The rocks ahead formed a shallow alcove that offered the faintest relief from the unrelenting sun, and Isaiah guided them toward it, kneeling to lower the child gently onto the shaded sand, while Ghost positioned himself between them and the glare of the ridge, chest lowered but eyes scanning, nose twitching as if to capture every scent carried in the dry, rising air. Isaiah crouched beside them, hand running along Ghost's flank, feeling the residual heat and the subtle tremors of exhaustion, whispering, "You are doing well, boy. Keep going." Ghost's tail flicked once, a measured gesture of acknowledgement, and Isaiah understood that the dog was not merely following instinct, but exercising a careful judgment that only came from experience and deep trust in his partner. The child leaned slightly against Isaiah, inhaling the warm air that carried the scent of both sand and the dog, and for a moment, Isaiah felt the weight of the environment, sun, stone, heat, and the vast emptiness pressing in, yet within it, a rhythm of life persisted, carried by the steadfast movements of a K9 who refused to falter. Isaiah's own muscles ached, sweat running down the back of his neck and pooling under his arms, yet he maintained the careful pace, adjusting support for the child and ensuring that Ghost remained balanced and protected, every action synchronized with the dog's measured guidance. As they reached the alcove, a faint glimmer caught Isaiah's eye, a subtle reflection, perhaps a sign, perhaps a small piece of debris, but it signaled that the next phase of their journey was imminent. Ghost pressed forward, low to the ground but resolute, encouraging Isaiah and the child to follow. And Isaiah felt the steady pulse of life within the desert, fragile yet persistent, guiding them towards safety through the trust and quiet communication that had formed between man and dog under the unrelenting Arizona sun. Isaiah Brooks stood in the slight shade of the rocky alcove, sweat dripping down his spine and searing the skin beneath his uniform, while Ghost shifted, lightly on his paws, the white fur sticking to sand and warmth, eyes scanning the surrounding desert with careful precision. The child pressed close, small fingers clutching the fabric of Isaiah's sleeve, trusting and vulnerable, yet the presence of Ghost seemed to lend courage, a shield of instinct and loyalty that transcended words. Isaiah reached down and brushed the dust from Ghost's muzzle, feeling the rapid, shallow pulse beneath his fingers, the tremor that spoke of exhaustion yet unbroken determination. He looked toward the ridge and calculated the next steps, each movement measured, knowing the uneven stones and scattered gravel could betray one misstep. But the dog's gaze remained fixed, pointing, guiding, almost pleading without sound, as if commanding Isaiah to continue despite fatigue. Isaiah lifted the child gently, supporting the small body with careful steadiness, and adjusted Ghost's position so that the dog remained alert, standing slightly in front, ears up, tail low, muscles tense but controlled. Every breath carried the desert, thick with heat and the scent of parched earth, the faint aroma of distant shrubs, and the metallic hint of stones warmed by the relentless sun. Isaiah spoke softly, low enough to blend with the whisper of wind. "We will keep going, boy. You lead." Ghost moved forward a step, then another, nudging Isaiah in a subtle rhythm that guided him across the uneven terrain, each paw placement deliberate and confident despite the visible strain. The child nestled against Isaiah's chest, whispering a small, almost inaudible, "Are we safe?" And Isaiah offered a reassuring squeeze, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper against his ribs. The sun glared overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that wavered with the shimmer of heat rising from the sand, and Isaiah became acutely aware of every small sound. A shifting stone, a faint scrape of brush, the distant call of a bird riding the hot air. Ghost paused suddenly, nose twitching, head tilting toward a small depression partially hidden by jagged stones, and Isaiah recognized the signal without question. He lowered the child carefully, maintaining support in case the ground gave way, and moved to kneel beside Ghost, following the dog's subtle cues. Each exhale was deliberate, cooling the throat, steadying the pulse, as Isaiah and Ghost navigated toward the depression. A faint shimmer of movement appeared, almost imperceptible against the rock and sand, and Isaiah's training sharpened every sense. He adjusted the child's position, leaning lightly to keep balance, while his eyes scanned the area, noting the irregularities in sand and the glint of sunlight against something that could be fabric or stone, a clue in a landscape designed to obscure. Ghost crouched slightly, a single low whine escaping, a sound of attention and communication, and Isaiah understood. They had found what Ghost had sensed from the beginning. Isaiah took a careful step forward, keeping low and deliberate, scanning the alcove and its subtle contours, every sense attuned to the small signals Ghost provided. The child held tightly, small arms around his neck, eyes wide yet gradually relaxing as they followed the dog's lead. Isaiah felt the heat pressing down, a constant, unyielding weight, but it no longer distracted him. It sharpened his awareness, made every choice immediate and essential. Ghost moved cautiously, then paused, paw lifted, eyes alert to a spot that Isaiah had noted only peripherally. There was a subtle shift in the shadows, the kind that indicated something or someone had been disturbed recently. Isaiah shifted his weight, keeping balance, lowering the child slightly, and moved toward the spot with careful, deliberate steps. Every inhale drew in the scent of sand, sun, and faint human presence, the combination guiding him, confirming what Ghost had silently indicated. The dog pressed slightly against his leg, nudging with measured insistence, and Isaiah followed, sensing the unspoken instruction. This was where attention mattered most. They approached slowly, the heat bending the air above the sand in visible waves, the small figure in the depression becoming clearer, and Isaiah noted the subtle signs of vulnerability, a slight movement, a glimmer of color against the earth tones, a presence waiting quietly. Ghost shifted again, low to the ground but focused, and Isaiah adjusted his steps to maintain rhythm and protection. The child leaned against his chest, trusting entirely, and Isaiah allowed himself a brief awareness of the moment. All movement, all caution, all patience was being rewarded by the quiet precision of a K9, whose instinct was now proving indispensable. Every step toward the depression was guided, coordinated, and deliberate, as Isaiah and Ghost prepared for the careful approach necessary to reach what the dog had signaled from the beginning, each moment a test of endurance, attention, and the unspoken bond between Marine and K9. Isaiah Brooks eased the child down beside a flat shelf of stone and followed Ghost into the shallow depression, where the desert seemed to hold its breath. The air changed there. It was still hot, still dry, still filled with the bitter taste of dust, but beneath it was another scent, faint and human, woven with sun-warmed fabric and the clean plastic smell of a child's water bottle. Ghost lowered his nose to the ground and moved with slow certainty, though his legs trembled beneath him. Every few steps, he stopped, looked back at Isaiah, and waited. Not for permission, for understanding. Isaiah wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, then crouched near a narrow opening between two leaning slabs of rock. The space was partly hidden by desert brush, its shadow so thin a person could have passed 10 feet away and seen nothing. Ghost pressed his muzzle toward it and let out a soft, broken sound. Isaiah leaned closer. At first, there was only darkness. Then he saw the shoe. Small, pink, covered in dust. The child behind him made a tiny gasp, a sound so full of fear and hope that Isaiah felt it strike somewhere deep in his chest. He turned to her gently. "Is that your mom?" The little girl nodded, her lower lip trembling, both hands wrapped around the strap of her faded backpack. "She told me to stay where there was shade," she whispered. Her voice was dry, barely louder than the scraping of sand against stone. She said she was just resting. Isaiah did not let his face change. He had learned long ago that people in fear listen more to a man's breathing than to his words. So he breathed slowly, calmly. He placed one hand on Ghost's shoulder and the other against the rock. "You did good staying close," he said. "You did exactly right." Ghost pushed forward again, careful and persistent, his pale coat catching the light at the edge of the crevice. Isaiah slid to one knee and looked through the gap. The woman was there, partly sheltered beneath a slant of stone, one arm tucked close to her side, her face turned away from the sun. She was still, too still, but when Isaiah held his breath and listened, he heard it. A faint inhale, fragile, uneven, alive. "Ma'am," Isaiah called softly. "My name is Staff Sergeant Isaiah Brooks. I am here to help you." No answer came, but her fingers shifted slightly against the sand. That was enough. In the desert, enough was holy. Isaiah looked at the rocks above her, studying the angles, the weight, the narrow opening. He would have to move carefully. No rushing. No panic. He removed his field jacket and folded it under the little girl's knees so the hot stone would not burn her skin. "What is your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Carter." Isaiah nodded once, steady and warm. "Lily, I need you to sit right here with Ghost. Can you do that for me?" Her eyes moved to the dog. Ghost had come back to her side without being called, lowering himself beside her as though his own pain could wait. Lily placed one hand on his neck, fingers sinking into the dusty white fur. Ghost closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again, alert. "He found us," Lily said. Isaiah looked at Ghost. The dog's breathing was shallow, but his gaze remained fixed and clear. "Yes," Isaiah murmured. "He did." Isaiah turned back to the crevice and worked slowly, moving loose stones one at a time, testing each piece before shifting it aside. The rocks were hot enough to sting his palms. Sand slid down his sleeves. His shoulders burned with effort. Behind him, Lily whispered to Ghost in the soft, serious voice children use when they believe animals understand more than adults. "Please do not sleep yet," she told him. My mom needs you. Ghost lifted his head at the word mom. His ears twitched. Isaiah heard it and felt the old ache open inside him. The memory of another voice from years ago, a young Marine calling through static, asking not to be forgotten. Not today, Isaiah thought. Not again. He reached farther into the gap, found the woman's wrist, and pressed 2 fingers lightly beneath the dust and warmth. A pulse answered him. Weak, but present. She is alive, Isaiah said. Lily made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughter, something small breaking open inside a child who had been holding fear too long. Isaiah took a slow breath and adjusted his position. He needed more shade, more water, more hands, more time. He had almost none of those. What he had was training. What he had was Ghost. What he had was the stubborn promise that had carried him through every hard mile of his life. He slid his belt loose, looped it carefully around the woman's forearm, and used it to guide her inch by inch toward the opening without pulling too hard. Stay with me, ma'am, he said. Your little girl is right here. The woman stirred faintly at that, as if the words had reached a place deeper than exhaustion. Ghost rose on shaky legs and stepped closer to the crevice, placing his body, so his white coat, through a narrow patch of shade across the woman's face. Isaiah stared at him for half a second, throat tightening. Even now, even when he could barely stand, Ghost was still working. Isaiah reached again, braced his boots against the sand, and pulled with careful strength until the woman's shoulders cleared the rocks. Lily whispered, "Mommy," and the desert seemed to soften around that one word. Isaiah laid the woman gently in the shade beside her daughter, checked her breathing, then turned his gaze toward the empty horizon. They had found both of them. Now they had to survive long enough for the world to find them back. Isaiah Brooks stood over Lily and her mother with the sun hammering down on all of them, and for one hard second, the truth settled into him heavier than the heat. Finding them had been the first miracle. Keeping them alive would require another. The small strip of shade beneath the slanted rock was shrinking inch by inch, retreating as the sun moved across the white sky, and the sand around them held the kind of heat that rose through clothing and skin as if the earth itself had become a stove. Lily sat close to her mother, one hand resting on her sleeve, the other buried in Ghost's dusty fur. The woman's breathing was faint but steady now, and Isaiah had positioned her on her side, loosened the scarf at her neck, and placed his folded jacket beneath her head. He had given Lily the last damp corner of his undershirt to press against her lips. There was no water left. Not a sip. Not a drop. His radio clicked with dead static when he tried it again, the sound thin and useless in the open air. His cell phone showed no signal. The jeep sat somewhere beyond the ridge, too far to reach quickly while carrying a child, an unconscious woman, and AK-9 who could barely stay upright. Isaiah looked toward the horizon. Nothing moved out there except heat. Are they coming? Lily asked. Her voice had the fragile calm of a child trying to be brave because the adults around her needed it. Isaiah crouched beside her, keeping his shadow over her face. They will, he said. He did not know that, but he knew she needed to hear it. Ghost lifted his head and looked at Isaiah, and in those amber eyes, there was no accusation, no fear, only waiting. Isaiah had seen that look before, not in a dog, in Marines. Men and women who trusted orders when the map was wrong and the road disappeared. The memory came back without permission. A valley overseas. A broken radio. A young Marine named Caleb breathing hard through static, trying to sound calm. Sarge, do not leave me. Isaiah had run until his legs burned and his lungs felt carved open. He had arrived late. The world had never said it was his fault, but the heart is not built to obey official reports. Now Lily's fingers tightened on Ghost's fur. Please do not leave my mom, she whispered. For words, soft as dust, heavy as a mountain. Isaiah closed his eyes once, just long enough to answer the memory. Not this time. He stood and scanned the ground around them, looking for anything useful. The torn scarf, a cracked plastic water bottle, the reflective strip on Ghost's working collar, the small metal dog tags resting against Isaiah's chest, hot from the sun. The windshield glass from the Carter vehicle, glinting faintly farther down the slope where the family's sport utility vehicle had come to rest beyond a screen of brush and rock. He could not move them all to the vehicle. Not yet, but he could bring pieces of the vehicle to them. Lily, he said gently, I need you to keep your hand on Ghost. Talk to him. Keep him awake for me." Lily nodded solemnly, tears tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "Ghost," she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "You have to stay. You found us, so you have to stay." Ghost blinked slowly, then pressed his muzzle against her knee. Isaiah moved fast but carefully down the slope, every step sending small stones skittering beneath his boots. The heat rose in waves thick enough to blur the wrecked vehicle into a trembling shape. He reached it, found the side window already fractured by the desert and the fall, and took several safe pieces of glass wrapped in his sleeve, choosing the flattest shard, the one that caught the sun cleanly. He grabbed a light-colored blanket from the back seat, a child's pink jacket, and a half-crushed emergency reflector from the roadside kit. When he climbed back to the alcove, his breath was rough and his vision shimmered at the edges. Lily looked up at him with desperate hope. Her mother's fingers had curled faintly around hers. That small movement renewed him more than water could have. Isaiah spread the blanket over a scrub branch and angled it to throw a wider patch of shade. He laid the pink jacket across Lily's shoulders, not for warmth, but to keep the sun off her skin. Then he removed Ghost's collar for the first time since the dog had been assigned to him. The reflective band was scratched, faded, and stained with miles of work, but when Isaiah held it up, it flashed bright white against the red desert. Ghost watched him, too tired to object, and Isaiah touched the dog's head. "I am borrowing this, partner," he said. "You will get it back." He tied the collar to a branch, hung his dog tags beside it, and used the glass shard and emergency reflector to aim light toward the open sky, sweeping slow arcs across the horizon. Again, again, again. Each flash felt impossibly small beneath the enormous sun. But then Ghost did something Isaiah would remember for the rest of his life. The dog rose, unsteady, trembling, barely able to lift his head. He stepped away from Lily and positioned himself at the edge of the alcove, where his white coat caught the full blaze of sunlight. "Ghost, down," Isaiah ordered softly. The dog did not obey. He stood there like a living signal, pale against the red stone, bright enough to break the pattern of the desert from above. Isaiah understood, and the understanding nearly undid him. Even exhausted, Ghost was still giving himself to the rescue. Isaiah aimed the reflector over the dog's shoulder, using that white figure as a marker, a flag, a prayer made visible. Minutes stretched. The horizon stayed empty. Then, faint and distant, beneath the buzz of heat and the whisper of sand, Isaiah heard a sound that did not belong to the desert. A rotor, far away, searching. Lily lifted her head. Isaiah kept flashing the light, slow and steady, his hand aching, his throat dry, his heart caught somewhere between fear and faith. Ghost swayed once, but did not fall. Not yet. Isaiah Brooks crouched in the thin shade of the rock, sweat caking the back of his neck, legs trembling slightly from the hours of exertion, as he adjusted the makeshift reflector and the glinting shards of glass to catch the sun at the perfect angle. Ghost stood tall, though unsteady, along the edge of the alcove, his white coat blazing in the sunlight like a living beacon, ears pricked, eyes sharp, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, any hint that their message had been received. Lily clutched the edge of Isaiah's jacket, her small fingers trembling, eyes wide and fixed on the dog, understanding in some instinctual way that Ghost was the signal, the line between them and salvation. Isaiah's own pulse pounded against his chest as he adjusted the reflector again, angling it just so, while his mind replayed every instruction drilled into him during years of desert. Training, signal, remain calm, conserve energy, and always protect the vulnerable. Every few seconds, Ghost would shift slightly, paw brushing the sand, muscles tense, then settle again, allowing the light to catch his fur just so, reflecting an unmistakable message across the desert expanse. Isaiah whispered softly to the dog, "Hold it. Keep steady. Just a little longer." And Ghost responded with a slow blink, as if acknowledging the command even without understanding words, instinct alone carrying him forward. The sun climbed higher, each wave of heat pressing into Isaiah's lungs. Yet he could not look away from the small triangle of light cast by the reflector, the tiny flash against the horizon, knowing that somewhere above, someone could see it, could respond, could bring help. Lily leaned closer, murmuring softly into Ghost's ear, her voice barely above the hiss of the heat rising from the sand. "Do not let them miss us, okay? You can do this." The dog shifted slightly toward her, nose brushing her shoulder, a gentle reassurance, and Isaiah felt a surge of both hope and exhaustion, the delicate balance of the moment teetering between despair and faith. Minutes passed, stretched and heavy, the desert silent except for the occasional whistle of wind through the rocks and the soft rustle of Ghost's coat. Isaiah's mouth was dry, his tongue thick in his mouth, but he continued adjusting the reflector, sweeping it slowly, deliberately, over the horizon, while Ghost maintained position, his white form a constant, luminous marker against the red dust. Then, far away, a faint, distant thrum reached Isaiah's ears, subtle yet unmistakable, a rotor brushing against the heat waves, growing clearer, growing closer. Lily gasped softly, gripping Isaiah's sleeve. Ghost's ears perked sharply, his body stiffening, tail low but tense, every muscle alert. Isaiah allowed himself a small nod, eyes scanning the incoming pattern of light and motion. The rotor drew nearer, the shadow of the helicopter skimming across the desert floor, reflecting in the glint of glass and dog tags, a moving shadow growing larger with each heartbeat. Isaiah crouched low, pressing a hand on Ghost's flank, murmuring, "Almost there. Keep steady. Hold the line." The dog remained statuesque, though quivering slightly from exhaustion, fur gleaming bright white in the sun, a living signal of persistence and guidance. Lily leaned against Isaiah, whispering small words of encouragement to Ghost, and the helicopter pilot, spotting the flashes of reflected light and the bright white shape, adjusted course toward them. Isaiah felt a faint rush of relief, yet he did not relax, knowing the desert had claimed many who had trusted too soon. Ghost remained alert, nose to the ground, ears scanning, eyes glimmering with unbroken vigilance, a living testament to instinct, loyalty, and courage. Isaiah continued to sweep the reflector, hands aching, sweat stinging his eyes, every breath heavy with heat and anticipation, while the sound of the rotor grew louder, a promise of safety and an answer to the silent call he and Ghost had carried across the unforgiving expanse. The child stirred beside him, eyes wide, lips moving in whispered thanks, and Ghost responded with a low, steady exhale, tail flicking once, maintaining position as the helicopter shadow fell closer across the sand, finally descending toward the small alcove where two humans and one devoted K9 had weathered the desert's trial. Isaiah's hand pressed briefly against Ghost's head, a quiet, wordless acknowledgement passing between them, understanding that the moment of rescue was near, that every second of endurance, every careful movement, every silent signal had brought them here, to the cusp of relief, hope, and the delicate miracle of survival. The helicopter settled onto the desert sand with a gentle thud, the rotor wash kicking up a fine cloud of red dust that shimmered in the sun, painting the edges of the alcove in moving streaks of light and shadow. Isaiah Brooks crouched beside Lily and her mother, brushing dust from their clothing while keeping his eyes on Ghost, who remained standing a few feet away, coat gleaming white, muscles trembling, yet every movement deliberate, protective, and vigilant. The air was thick with the heat of the day, carrying the scent of sand, sun-baked stone, and the faint tang of metal from the helicopter, yet it was now punctuated by the soft, steady hum of rotors and the distant voices of rescuers moving toward them. Lily's mother opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the light, confusion melting into recognition and relief, and she murmured the first words she had spoken in hours. "Isaiah?" Her voice was fragile, but carried warmth. Isaiah nodded, keeping one hand on the child and the other hovering near Ghost, who stepped closer, nudging Lily with his nose as if ensuring her safety while offering a steady presence. The child let out a soft laugh, a mixture of disbelief and joy, her small arms wrapping around the dog's neck. Ghost leaned into her, ears twitching, tail low but relaxed, the first sign of ease after a long struggle. Isaiah felt the tight knot of tension in his chest begin to loosen as he looked at the two lives they had preserved, and yet his mind remained vigilant, scanning the surrounding desert for any unforeseen obstacles. The rescue team approached cautiously, eyes wide with the expanse of heat and the brilliant white marker of the dog guiding them. and Isaiah waved them over with careful gestures, ensuring the child and her mother were prepared for safe extraction. Ghost remained stationary, the fur along his spine rising slightly in instinctive alertness, then slowly settling as Isaiah crouched and whispered softly, "It is okay now, boy. They are here." The pilot maneuvered the helicopter carefully over the uneven sand, and a rope ladder descended, swaying slightly in the desert breeze. Isaiah guided Lily toward it, supporting her small frame while keeping one eye on Ghost. The mother followed, using Isaiah's shoulder for balance, her strength returning gradually as the cool shade of the helicopter blades moved over them. Ghost moved with Isaiah, positioning himself at the base of the ladder, eyes scanning upward, ensuring the family's safety until they were all securely aboard. Once the last of them had ascended, Isaiah felt Ghost nudge against his leg, warm and steady, the living proof of endurance and loyalty that had carried them through hours of relentless sun, heat, and uncertainty. Isaiah lifted the dog into his arms, careful of the trembling limbs, and felt the pulse of life that had refused to surrender. Each breath Ghost took a testament to determination and faith. The helicopter lifted slowly, sand falling in small clouds beneath the skids, and Isaiah held Ghost close, the child leaning against him, wrapping tiny arms around his torso, and the mother watching with a grateful, quiet smile that conveyed more than words ever could. The desert stretched behind them, vast and unyielding, yet in the foreground, the miracle of persistence, instinct, and unwavering trust had prevailed. Ghost rested his head against Isaiah's shoulder, amber eyes flicking between the child and the man who had guided them through the trial. Understanding that the moment was complete, yet the bond unbroken, the quiet miracle settled into the hearts of all three, a living memory of survival, care, and the invisible thread that connects human and dog through trust, loyalty, and courage.